Thank you guys for coming out. It's so exciting to have people in this building when it's not just a meeting or work or something like that. So it's really cool to see people here. And the 23rd for Old Home Day, we'll have our big opening, so you'll be able to roam more and explore and see everything. So that'll be exciting. That'll be at 2 p.m. on July 23rd. So we have Art Morse here talking about the Suncook Valley Sun. Really happy to have you.
Thank you.
And yeah, afterwards we have some refreshments. We have some cookies and some snacks. So if you want to hang out and have something to eat. And we have some t-shirts for sale too. Maria is the model.
Oh.
Yeah. So they're $15. And yeah, we have them up here. So thanks for coming, and I hope you guys enjoy the first program in our new building.
I'm hoping that all of you feel some sympathy for Nella. She's picking on her husband to cart her all over the place. It's unreal.
Well, I was so bored, I thought I'd come out.
You're good, Nella.
I have some artifacts that I want to pass around. It'd really be easier if we were all together to pass them around, but I'm not forcing anyone to move. Thanks.
He prefers you would move up, I think is what he's suggesting.
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me to speak. As several years ago, I was an elementary school teacher for 21 years. Therefore, I have some guidelines that I expect to be followed. None of you want to stay after school, right? I divided my presentation into 6 parts. After each section, I will entertain questions. Please question only that area that I've just presented to you. After I've taken out questions for the 6th part, entitled Negative, I'll be glad to take questions on the entire presentation or anything that I didn't mention. I have a few artifacts pertaining to the sun. These are from the Morse's personal collection, so please handle them with extreme care. The Suncook Valley Sun, history. Let me begin with a bit of history of the sun. First of all, there was never supposed to be a Suncook Valley Sun. Sidney Robinson, the founder of the paper, was in France after World War II, courting Sonia, who became his wife and partner in the newspaper business. Sidney's family had long been involved in printing. It was his plan and assumption that they would return to Pittsfield and purchase the Valley Times. The Valley Times was a paper serving Pittsfield and surrounding towns and was established in 1877. Copy of the Valley Times. A 1956 edition sold for 7 cents and $3 for an annual subscription. Before the Robinsons got back to Pittsfield, the Valley Times was sold to Tom McComb. As Sidney told me about it, I got the impression that this was a very sore spot in his printing career. The Robinsons' plans changed. In 1954, they established a 4-page shopper, the Shopper's Guide. I couldn't find a copy of the Shopper's Guide. This is a copy of the Sun in the early years, but the Shopper's Guide was about like this. You notice it wasn't newsprint and it was smaller. Most of the Shopper's Guides were only 4 pages. The Shopper's Guide grew, and in 1956 became the Suncook Valley Sun. The Sun was a regular weekly newspaper with a unique small-town flavor. During the holiday season of 1984, Else and I attended attended a Christmas party at the home of Roland and Helen Sharon. The Robinsons also were in attendance. Parties at the Sharons went well into the early morning hours. When things had quieted down, the Robinsons came to us offering to sell us the Sun. Although Else and I loved children and teaching, the profession was changing. We felt that it was a good time to leave teaching, and the Sun fit right in to Elsie's background as being a journalism teacher. We agreed to accept the offer of the Suncook Sun. Any questions on the history? Very good. Suncook Valley Sun sold. Art and Elsie Morse, new owners. On July 1st, 1985, the Morses took possession of the Sun. At that time, we were mailing to Barnstead, Chichester, Deerfield, Epsom, Gilmanton, Loudon, Northwood, Pittsfield, Stratford, and West Nottingham. We printed about 11,000 papers as we dropped them at advertisers in the various towns that we served, in addition to our mailings to everyone who had a mailing address in those towns. At this time, all of our mailed papers were given to the Pittsfield Post Office for delivery. It was this July of 1985 that the true learning curve began for the Morses. Our first publication was the July 10th edition, and it was made up of 28 pages. All editions of the Sun were in multiples of 4 pages, 20, 24, 28, etc. The post office had regulations that we had to follow. At the top of the list for us to follow was that no paper could contain more than 75% advertising. Thus, when the paper was going to exceed 75%, we had to add 4 pages to the paper. Obviously, adding pages added to the cost of printing, even though the advertisers paid the same no matter what the cost of printing. Secondly, it cost us as a piece price to mail the papers unless they weighed over 3.5 ounces. Then we paid for the pound for the excess weight. Third, any insert in the paper, flyers from the hardware store, etc., counted as advertising. Therefore, we would need to increase the number of pages. There were times when the paper had pages in the 50s and 60s. The 3 combined would increase the cost of the mailing, and the post office wanted cash when we dropped the paper off for mailing. This was our first issue. At one time, the Sun office was located in the train depot on Broadway Extension. However, that had burned down. When we purchased the paper, the office was at 3 Franklin Street, in the basement of the Robinson home. We were in a short period of time before computers, but after linotype. We constructed each issue pretty much by hand. All type was on film, and any graphics were cut from a magazine produced by a monthly subscription service or photographed. The type was generated on a machine called a CompuGraphic. These are the same, it's a CompuGraphic machine. The screen on that machine was about 3/4 of an inch high and maybe 9 inches wide. So you really couldn't see much of what you were constructing. We had physical typefaces that we manually loaded into the CompuGraphic. We had 2 machines, one for the editorial content and one for advertising. The film for the news was about the size of one of our columns, 1.5 inches. There was no way to correct an error in typing. Once you hit the key, there was no going back. The film was then taken to the darkroom to be developed. After proofing the editorial and finding an error, we went back to the machine and correctly typed 3 lines for where the error was located. Then we would paste the correction over the error. It was necessary to print at least 3 headlines for each story in the paper, or 1 column, a 2 column, and a 3 column article. And each of those headlines were a different type size. The entire paper was put together by putting wax on the back of the film that we had typed. The film was then pasted onto oak tag sheets the size of 2 pages of the paper. The construction of the weekly paper started by pasting the ads first and then the news. Advertising for the next issue typically started coming in on Thursday, and our deadline was Friday. We put together as much as we could on Thursday and Friday, but Saturdays were always work days. On good weeks, we worked Sundays as well. Mondays were used to paste up the paper, to have it ready for delivery to the printer by noon on Tuesday. During the heyday of the Sun, there were numerous Monday evenings when we worked through the wee hours of Tuesday morning, and I'd be off with only a couple of hours sleep to bring the paper to the printer. We had the paper printed at the Eagle Times in Claremont. The Eagle was an afternoon paper, so I could not get on the press until after they had printed their daily. After checking if the paper was acceptable, I took the bundles of 50 papers and bagged them into mailing bags. Having loaded the papers, I drove home and arrived at the office by late afternoon or early evening. The final chore before Wednesday mailing was to run the subscriptions through the addressograph. Wednesday, before the post office was open to the public, we bought the papers to be mailed. Then began our weekend, Wednesday. Any questions about that?
How big was your staff during this time period?
That when we began, we had 4 people. And then in the next part, we grew.
Thank you.
So the 4 people included you and Elsie, or did you have 4 people?
No, 4 people, outside, another typesetter who was terrific. She could do like 1,000 words a minute. It was unreal. And she did all of the editorial for us. And then we had someone that helped us do the paste up for the ads.
Did you buy those graphics? Did you buy those? Or?
Hey, I bought them when I bought the paper.
Oh,
They were with
they came
paper.
with it.
Yeah. Modern technology. In the middle of the 80s, computers arrived on the scene. But Sydney advised us against using these newfangled fads. Thankfully, we went against his advice and purchased an Apple Macintosh for $2,600 and an Apple Laser Writer for $7,000. However, a new CompuGraphic would have been $65,000. The Mac had limited capabilities at this time, however, we were able to do all of our editorial on it. Meaning, if we made an error, we could correct it on screen as soon as we discovered it. This was an enormous savings in time. By 1989, we were totally converted to computers. Good thing, too, as CompuGraphic went out of business in 1988. We switched to Windows computers as they were developing more programs that enhanced our ability to to construct the Sun. With these figures I'm going to give you, when Elsa and I bought the paper, we were charging $2.10 a column inch. When Ross closed down the paper, we were charging $11.25 a column inch. So the figures look awfully good, but there's a difference in there. When we purchased the paper in 1985, we were selling between $200,000 and $275,000 a year of advertising. Through most of the 90s and into the beginning of the next century, our sales were between $500,000 and $750,000. At our height, we had 5 to 7 people working for us, as well as the advertising firm of 2 people to sell ads for us. I was the advertising rep for Pittsfield, Barnstead, and Northwood. I'd spend half of Thursday selling in Northwood, and I'd spend all day Friday selling in Pittsfield. Barnstead was handled pretty much as an on-call service. We also had correspondents that supplied news from the towns that we covered. We generously paid them 25 cents a column inch. Now you know why Joanne Liu was so wordy in her column. Else, being the editor, controlled what went into the Sun. I mean, she really controlled it. That I could not write an editorial. I could only write a letter to the editor, like all the other residents could do. She did many fine articles highlighting the goodness of our town and the surrounding towns. But her story of traveling the potholes and frost heaves, coming home over Catamount, was my favorite. As for me, I was mostly limited to my miscellaneous column. The miscellaneous that I liked the most was the one that got us into the most trouble. I went to an engineering firm and had them draw a sketch of a tunnel to be built under Route 28 and Levitt Road. We then wrote a story that the tunnel would be built to eliminate the need for a stoplight at the intersection. We placed the drawing and the story on the front page of the April 1st edition of the Sun. The article was continued on the inside, where it concluded with making it known that it was an April Fool article. Apparently, some of the construction workers did not bother to complete the story. They told us what they thought over the phone and in person. Any questions on that?
What year was that article?
I don't know. Do you remember what it was, Ross?
I don't
We were
recall.
here.
There were only so many April 1st that fell on a Wednesday.
Yeah, because we only
So,
do it when it was on a Wednesday.
yeah.
I think we were here, we lived here.
I was so surprised that people actually bought that. 'Cause on the interior, we had a paragraph that talked about the reason that the decision was made for the tunnel was because the alternative was to drill deep below Drake Field to the geothermal cache. And that Pittsfield had courted the Boston Red Sox to do their spring training. But had decided that the travel expense for the other teams to come back and forth from New Hampshire to Florida was too much, and therefore it was money better spent for the tunnel instead. It was just crazy.
10 years and retired. It was our intent to retire in 10 years after purchasing the Sun. There were, however, conditions that would have to be met in order for this to happen. And as you now know, those conditions were never met. The most important condition dealt with the content of the paper. We believe strongly that the community is all important. Whatever we could do to enhance our communities as a product, that is what we intended to deliver. We were not just a newspaper. We were a good newspaper. We strive to highlight the best of each of the communities we cover. Here's an example of some of the beginnings. I'm not reading the whole articles. Some of the articles that we covered, this is just one issue. Congratulations to Gretchen and Michael Wolf of Pittsfield on the birth of Dana Sampson and Linda Provincial biked Tilton Hill to Will Smith up Province Road across to Thompson Pond Road. Morning worship service will be held Sunday morning at 11 a.m. at the Quaker Church. Kudos this week to John Lenartz for the wonderful job he's done in the hanging flower baskets. Leonard and Joanne Reel have returned home after a 2-week vacation. Hervey and Barbara spent 2 weeks recently enjoying a busy vacation of visiting. Celebrating birthdays are PYBA, if you are a coach or would like to become a coach, the best blueberry pie in Barnstead. Barnstead Summer Concert Series, Nevers 2nd Regiment Band. The Pittsfield High School class of 1956 recently held their 45th reunion in Pittsburgh, New Hampshire. Word has gotten out and people are driving from all around for the now famous ham and bean supper. Epsom Old Home Day Committee is looking for volunteers. The sunflower has become wildly popular. Chichester Library is holding its August book, bake, and yard sale. Eagle Project in need of support. The Gilmanton PTA will be starting early this year. Now truly, can anyone name another paper that reports this kind of news that I've just read? None of this was paid for by the people that contributed it. Who did pay for it? Not the Morses. No, it was paid for by the many businesses that advertised it. The second condition that we had to be made was that we had to know who was purchasing it. In the mid-1990s, we received an offer from an anonymous source in Maine. We informed them that we had to know who was making the offer. They refused to disclose this information, and therefore, we held on to the Sun. Questions?
Is that a good decision?
I thought so until 2019. we really, both Elsa and I, and when Ross took over as well, that we really had a feeling that we didn't want a stranger to come in here and present a regular newspaper. That I think the Sun was totally different in what it presented and how we presented it. And we didn't want to lose that. And obviously, in the middle of the 90s, the other thing I told Elsie was, we're making so much money, we don't want to sell it. Positive or negative? At the turn of the century, things began to change. Our advertising rep passed away, and the team that took over was not really interested in selling ads. The automobile dealerships cut back drastically. We lost a weekly full page when Pittsfield's second supermarket was sold and eventually went out of business. Then in 2003, Elsa was diagnosed with cancer. These are a few of the examples of what the Sun was dealing with at this time. However, we were still a profitable business. Fortunately, our eldest son decided to come home. Ross had been traveling the world as a sound engineer for music groups. Perhaps the one some of you would know was the Little River Band. Coincidentally, the only hit they had that made it to the #1 on the charts, do you know what it was?
I'm gonna find out.
help is on the way. Ross was the help that we needed at that time. The first step in helping us was to get the equipment and programs to allow us to print off an entire page of paper exactly as it would look in print. We no longer had to construct color separations. Soon, he had us no longer having to print off the paper and carry it to the printer to be photographed and made into plates. Using the internet, we were able to press a single button on the computer and our entire edition on the printer went to the printer. Wow, the internet was a positive. This is probably too heavy for us to pass around, but this is what the plates look like that the printer made. See, 4 pages were printed at a time. Both of these 4 pages would be on the same press. And so we had to go send it up there, and they would make this, and then from that, they printed the paper. And this used to belong to the Lanks. Margie gave it to me today to bring it down to present to the Historical Society for them to keep. Not because of the son, but because her son was runner-up on the championship basketball team. Negative. In 2008, Eltz was pronounced cancer-free, but 6 months later, the cancer had returned. Eltz and I agreed that we were going to make the most of whatever time we had left together, and pretty much turn the son over to Ross. In 2009, the national condition of the newspaper industry was made abundantly clear to us. The Eagle Times closed down. On a Thursday before our next Monday print day, we were informed that we would no longer be a printing business. We were to go to Claremont, pick up any inserts that had been delivered to them for future issues of the Sun. We had 3 days to secure another printer.
Wow.
Eltz and I were off enjoying the ocean when Ross called to inform us of what he just explained to you. He also informed us that he'd already found another printer, the Concord Monitor. The internet was negatively affecting the newspaper industry. The recession of this period was also a negative. The first to be hit were small-town weekly newspapers like The Sun. I was informed that from 2004 to 2019, the United States had lost 2,000 newspapers. Of the 2,000 that went out of business, 1,700 were weekly newspapers. As it was, the demise of the Times and our moving to the Monitor was a benefit to the Sun. Few of you probably noticed the change, but it was significant. You have no idea what the change was that occurred when we went to the Monitor for printing?
Different paper?
Color?
Color.
For 50 years, the Suncook Sun was this size.
Well, yeah, it was different.
2009, it became shorter. The presses at the Monitor could not print a tabloid, and so we had to change it. Few of you probably noticed a change, but it was significant. The presses at the Monitor could not print the tabloid size the Sun had been for years. We were, until 2009, 17 inches long. Moving to the Monitor, we had to drop to 13 3/4 inches. The first benefit was that it was much less expensive to print the paper. Secondly, the price of mailing went down a bit, because the weight of the paper was less. Still being in business in 2012, we thought we had weathered the storm and would survive. To save more money and improve delivery to the other towns we serve, we stopped mailing all the papers through the Pittsfield post office. At the time, the class of mail that we were mailing under, that once it left the Pittsfield post office, the paper could sit for 3 days in any post office it went to. And so there were people that were not getting their Donnie's ad until the Saturday after it started on the Monday before. And so we felt that was a good reason to do that. We delivered the papers ourselves to all local offices. Next, we decided to stop mailing the paper to the Gilmantons. The first reason for doing this was the post office. First, they made us deliver the Gilmanton Connors papers to the Belmont post office, which we did for a while. Then the post office made us deliver the Ironworks papers to Alton. That was too much, and advertising from the Gilmantons had dropped off significantly. So we were now needing fewer papers, and again, our printing bill went down. We were keeping our head above water, but advertising was continually declining. I'm going to read to you a list of advertisers from 1985. See if you can discern what they all have in common. Suncook Valley Disposal, M&M Ford, V&S Variety, Pittsfield Medical Center, Witcher Lumber, New Hampshire Savings Bank, Scenic Theater, Sandy's Flower Box, Arthur's Luncheonette, Hardy's Supermarket, Belanger Construction, H.J. Lang, Gibbons Construction, Jeannie's Beauty Nook, Barbara's Little Beauty Shop, Stonewall Properties, Stevens Construction, Radio Service Lab, Miners Lumber, Super Service, Walt Lang Chevrolet, Dane Photography, Greenland TV, Janess and Son Construction, Video Library, Pittsfield Gas and Oil, Hawaiian Isle 2, Tom Gino's Color Print, Diet Center, Down Under Unisex Salon, Care Pharmacy, Suncook Bank, Capital Dodge, Fairmonte Olds, Capital City Motors, Mother Bear and Cubs, Oak Birch Inn, Video Corner, Jim's Small Engine Repair, and 6 Realtors. What do they all have in common?
Out of business.
They're all out of business.
Yeah, they're gone. People move on.
Sydney told us that you could gauge the health of a newspaper by the size of the classified section. In 1985, we had 4 full pages of classifieds. At the end, we were barely 1 page. Finally, at the beginning of 2019, we knew that we could not go on. After 60 years, the Suncook Valley Sun would end. I'm rounding these figures off just to illustrate the point. We were printing 8,640 papers each week at a cost of $1,200. Mailing was $1,500 per week. We needed $286,000 annually to stay in business. Printing and mailing took $140,000. That left us $68,000 for all our other expenses. We were short by $1,500 a week from meeting our needs. To us, it did not make sense to extend the life of the sun for a year or 2 by drastically changing the dynamics of the sun that we truly treasure. That's it. Take questions. Yes.
I knew I was supposed to ask this after the first chapter, and I didn't. May I ask it now?
Yes, I'm sorry.
All right, what transpired between Tom McCone and Sidney Robinson as far as?
I never knew, but when Sydney told me about it, I got the impression that someone had done something that was behind his back. And because he, in France, he was confident that when he got back, he'd be able to buy the Valley Times. Larry probably knows all about it.
He might, but he's not telling.
No commit.
All right, I got a question.
Yeah.
Remember the time you taught me what a free press was? I had written another letter about the Randy Cutter episode, and you called me up and said, Dan, that's enough. I won't take another letter about Randy Cutter. And I says, whoa, whoa, whoa. Haven't you ever heard of a free press? And I thought it was a free press. And then you said, Dan, that means the owner can decide to print what he wants. I had no idea.
And now that is abundantly true with the press, isn't it?
It's right. No, but you taught me that. I had no clue.
There's another, and one of my friends argued with me, but we had a limit of 300 words on a letter to the editor. And there was a person that was running for the legislature, and there was a person that was in the legislature. They were running against each other. We allowed people that were in office to have more than 300 words. But if you were running against somebody, or if you were just a candidate, you had to stick to the 300. Well, this person has seen what the incumbent had written, and it was like 600 words. And he wanted me, well, you let them do it, let me do it, that's only fair. But we stuck to it that because those are the rules, and we made everyone follow it, whether I agreed with them politically or not, that you only got 300 words.
I recall too that Mom always thought if you can't get your point across within 300 words, then you need to look at that and choose your words more carefully. That really made people think about how do I get my point across in this limited amount of space.
That was the journalism teacher in our...
Yeah.
You had two people living in Northwood that loved the write letters.
Tom Chase and...
Tom Chase and well, the other guy was attacking the schools all the time.
Okay.
I forget his name, but
Okay. I know Tom. Tom really liked it, and I know that Tom wrote an article for some other paper when we went out of business and how much it would be missed. And I don't know, my son-in-law, we were talking just the other day, and he says he's in his 50s, and he says from the talk he's hearing that he thinks something like the Sun could make it back and be successful now. I don't agree with that, but to me, it seems like people my age and maybe 20 years younger in their late 50s really miss the Suncook Valley Sun and want to have it. But someone who's brought up playing video games and instantly finding out what's wrong, whether it's true or not, is not going to be interested in a paper. And the other thing that we used to, and it upset some people, but if you had a mailing address in the town, you got the paper. And we thought that was good for our advertisers. Whether you wanted it or not, you were going to get it. Well, there was this one person that I think probably was when I was chairman of the school board and we were trying to do the cooperative with Barnstead, who got upset with, I don't want that paper in my house. Went to the post office, and the post office says, no, you can't stop it. He pays to have it delivered, and you have to take it.
well, you know, in the town of Epsom where I live now, your paper was beloved. They loved it. They miss it terribly.
And the articles that I read about the demise of weekly papers, it's basically the same type of thing as with the Suncook Sun. That we don't find out that Harry went to visit his daughter down in South Carolina, or that so-and-so did this, just the neat things that keep us in touch with one another, and I feel, and maybe I'm incorrect, but make us more of a community. That I don't have to have a personal relationship with each person in the community, but I know what's going on in the community because of information like that. But it's not news, it's not reported anywhere.
Well, Addie, I just want to say that, and I'm sure everybody here probably would agree with me, that we really miss the sun. And what I miss about it a lot is not just our Pittsfield news, but it was the greater community around us, that we don't know what's going on. You know, we don't know the events that are going on, and I think that we're missing a lot from that. I'm wondering, how does the Ledger in Loudon, how do they do that newspaper and survive? It's a huge newspaper.
Isn't that funded by the town?
Yeah.
I don't know, it's funded by the town. That's amazing. That's amazing.
And to your point of knowing what's going on around, I know a person, what was it, 2 nights ago, asked me when this was, because he couldn't find it anywhere.
It's true though, when we moved here, we didn't even know Pittsfield existed before we moved here, we moved 10 years ago. And your paper helped us understand it and get to know the people and know about Story Hour and know about the church. And, you know, we met everybody that we know today because of
And you
your
still
paper.
want to stay here.
I still want
What a job we did!
There's a lady in Suncook that's trying to recreate a paper.
There's been a couple of things I've heard about them trying, but from that last paragraph I showed you, that if we felt that from the advertising point of view, that we had to get the paper into people's homes. We could have saved a bunch of money by not mailing it and dropping it off and having it picked up. But from the drop paper, and there are successful ones that do happen, but from the ones I see, there are quite a few left over to be picked up when they bring the new one out that are still sitting where they were dropped off. And so we didn't want to get into that, or to make it less and less of a paper, so that we had to keep cutting things out.
And I'd just like to add kudos to the people that are doing the Post. It's a great little weekly thing, but it's just Pittsfield. So that's what I really miss. I see the Pittsfield stuff. And thank you to Andy Real, my daughter-in-law, by the way, who writes a very long column. I don't think she gets paid by the inch like Joanne Real did. But anyway, you know, that and the Epsom News, so we can read it in the Monitor on Saturday or Sunday, but it's not the same. And the Pittsfield Post is, you know, I really thank the people that are doing that, because at least it's local stuff.
You know, one thing I want to add is your paper made it possible. People read my letters, like Elmer Tasker and Mr. Cutter from Epsom, and they liked my letters. And they called me up, and I did a lot of business with these people. Without the paper, I would have had much less of a career in the stonework. I wouldn't have met all these people. They liked my letters, you know? That's why they called me. They read the paper. They read the paper. Anyway, it was important. I just retired. I don't take any more paper. And when I look back without the paper, it would have been difficult, to say the least. Yeah, so thank you.
And you never charge a subscription price? You
Subscription,
never, yeah.
we charge subscription. If we mailed out of our area, we charge, what did it end up with, $30 a year?
At the end, yeah,
Yeah.
it was minimal. It really just covered the expense of the
Yeah.
postage.
Now,
I was gonna say, if you had charged to have the paper, would that have made a difference?
I don't know.
Just
Ross and I went through all these things, and where things were going so bad, I mean, you know, $1,500 a week is more money than I want to spend on nothing.
Yes.
And we just thought, well, yeah, we can save that, but what's the next thing that's going to happen? Well, we can save that, but then what's going to happen? And that although we did have subscriptions, we didn't, how many did we have?
It was very few, I mean, it was less than 30, I would say.
Yeah.
It-
And yet, I still get texts and some from people who don't live in town. Oh, how much I miss it because I wanted to know
Yeah.
who and so on and so on. But there were 30 of them that wanted to pay for it. So,
And you would have had to hire another person just to handle the subscriptions if it were to be paid for 8,000,
It was so much fun writing letters. One time I wrote one about Ed, the end of Larry Kanopka. If you wanted to ride to the polls, give them a call. Of course, they weren't in favor of mine. They called me up, Larry said, they're gonna beat me up when I come to town. I had to write a retraction, and they didn't beat me up. But stuff like that was so much fun. You know what I mean? Really, it was so much fun.
my own experience, else decided what went in the paper. And again, during the co-op time, a gentleman from Barnstead wrote this letter calling me some name. I forget what the name was. It wasn't vulgar, but it was knowing that I wasn't a good person. And then as it happened, the next summer, he was a friend of one of my classmates who lived in Barnstead. We were over at the concert, and my classmate friend introduced the guy. Yep.
On a more serious note, I think it had a tremendous impact by not allowing people to learn about their candidates for political office. Because there used to be letters to the editor in support. The candidates themselves would tell their experience and background. Right now, people are voting blind.
Yeah, that was really helpful, being able to read all those perspectives. I totally agree.
Carol Maguire is still searching where she, with her commentary on what she's doing with Plato. She's even got to the Pittsfield Post now.
Question, any advice for somebody that was trying to bring back a local newspaper on a monthly basis?
I just, it's, besides the idea of I guess, no, I don't have anything. I can only tell you that the businesses no longer want to advertise in a paper.
Mhm.
That it's very difficult to get them to advertise.
What if you were able to get the advertisers?
If you could get them, that should, figure out what you have to charge them to do your printing, and if you want to mail it, include that in it.
My problem is getting writers. Writers
Really?
and extra hands for people that are willing to
Well, are
actually.
you trying to be a newspaper who sends people to the school board meeting and the select meeting, or are you just want people to tell you what's happening in town?
Well, I mean, that's what's happening in town though.
Well, no, but see, we never, the Sun, never sent anybody to the school board meeting or the select board meeting to take notes to let us go get. We relied upon the town hall
Right,
and the
yeah, so
school
that's what I
to
would
give
do.
it to us. But we had no problem, well, it fell off, but people were willing to send us information about the silly stuff, so-and-so visited so-and-so, and what you call it, just graduated from such and such. But we never had what you'd call a reporter at the Sun. And that's for all 60 years, not just when we owned it.
So you just had people from the town that you leaned on that.
We had, in each town that we delivered to, we had one correspondent. And at the end of it, they started to drop out, that we couldn't find another one. But we didn't advertise all that much, because at that time, there was quite a few people who knew that if they gave us something pertaining to the town that was interesting, we'd put it in the paper for them.
The big hit with the Suncook Sun, and everybody did it. They opened it up and they looked for the letters. I'm telling you.
Especially
Well,
yours.
But
No, but that's how it was.
the other portion of it we found is that, again, back in 1985 to 2002, 2003, that the Suncook Valley Sun was the telephone book for the communities. That most of the people that got it on Wednesday kept it until the next Wednesday when it was replaced. And they did through reading it, but that's where they went to find the number, who can fix my car, who can mow my lawn, who wants to babysit, and that. And they used it that way.
It's true.
That was the trusted telephone directory as well. You knew
Yes.
if they were advertising in the Sun, I can trust that they're gonna be providing me with the service that I paid for. So,
Right, we tried to be careful about who we allowed to advertise. I'm not gonna mention names or anything, but we wanted to make sure there was a reputable advertiser that was in the paper, even if they happened to disagree with me politically.
See, the internet, Google has replaced a lot of that. You get so much information on the internet now.
But again, not to argue the point, but it's my own personal experience. I go onto Facebook and I'll see this thing, who can I get to shingle my roof? And they'll get 10 answers. But after each of those answers, there's someone saying, oh, you don't want them, blah, blah, blah. Oh, you don't want them, blah, blah, blah. Oh, you don't want them. And so, what help is it? Thank you.
Thank you.